Welcome to Cracking the Code. My co-host Sanjay, Cherian, and I will be talking about some interesting topics around the SEC's proposal to help us understand more what's going on from a cyber and a risk management perspective on public companies. So Sanjay, you've read about this a little bit. You've been part of boards in the past. What are your thoughts on the SEC's proposal? If you can maybe provide some of the outlines of what they're proposing, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think what they're proposing effectively, Chris, is to have more board oversight around cybersecurity issues. I think if you think about some of the evolution of risk management and how it has impacted board governance, back in the 90s, we saw the introduction of something called Sarbanes-Oxley to try to improve financial reporting and risks around that. And I think what we're seeing fast forward today is kind of like the next version of sort of a version of Sarbanes-Oxley, not really Sarbanes-Oxley, but from applied to the cybersecurity space. We're seeing a lot of issues around cybersecurity and threats that need to be managed from an operational perspective. And that is translating into awareness and understanding and visibility at the board level and being able to understand that. And so the SEC is now requiring people at the board level to have representation from a technical background, from a cybersecurity background, as well as regular reporting to the SEC of those incidents.
So what's the big deal? I mean, shouldn't companies be able to manage themselves? Are they not doing that effectively? If we recall Sarbanes-Oxley, that was stemming from an Enron fraud situation. Mm-hmm. And so let's think about the autonomous nature of a public company. What are your thoughts in terms of that kind of information?
Well, it's challenging, right? I think that we're living in a sort of time, particularly with healthcare organizations, where ransomware and destabilization due to nation-state actors and others is a significant risk for the organization. Now, having said that, organizations have other avenues to report these incidents and manage them, and that will be a challenge now to do that to yet another entity, being the SEC. However, I do think that there is some benefit at the board level around not just representation with individuals who have a cybersecurity background, so they can provide that knowledge set to the board, but also about governance around cybersecurity. Do they have the right reporting? And knowledgeable reporting, and is that visible to both the broader board? Does the board understand and can interpret what those threats are and the seriousness and how it impacts the business? Do they have the right subcommittee structures? And is it part of the right kind of risk conversations at the board level? So I think those are all beneficial things for boards of directors to understand clearly, and also understand how it is impacting their business strategies and their day-to-day operations.
Yeah, those are good points, Sanjay. I think from my perspective as an investor in a company or two, and I'm sure you're also an investor in Clear Data, it's important, I think, for the investor to understand what's going on. If you look back at some of the most egregious situations, Uber's coming to mind, back when they were kind of wild west. In fact, their CISO, they were a private company at the time, but their CISO actually bribed some hackers to not tell anybody about a massive event that happened at Uber. So if you think about some of the abuses that have happened, some of the, let's just not tell anybody that we just got this ransomware attack, or let's just cover this up and hopefully nobody has to know about it. If you think about the fiduciary responsibility of a board, the investor should actually know this kind of thing. So I do applaud the intent to give information to the investing community? Because that's material. What say you?
I absolutely agree. Look, I think I go one step forward on top of that as well. I mean, data is the lifeblood of every digital system these days. Data that's stolen or held hostage or even corrupted can really introduce some downstream risk into operational processes, can inhibit, strategic growth agendas. So if I'm an investor, I want to understand that, because most of the growth that I'm investing in are around many of these organizations' data strategies. And that's what we're talking, that's at risk here, right? That data. So that's an important piece. I wanted to ask you, Chris, the CISOs of these organizations are really going to have to step up their game now, and probably provide a lot more interaction with the board, a lot more visibility. And their role is going to be increasingly more strategic, as things like this play out. How much, what are some of the challenges that CISOs are going to face given this new sort of mandate from the SEC? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the SEC, in some ways, they're asking for a little too much. For example, one of the things that they want to pull out is, how often does a board talk about cybersecurity? Well, that's a very subjective thing. If I mention the word cybersecurity, well, I've technically talked about it, so I'm checking a box. So there's a check the box mentality, or there's a fulfill the intent of what the SEC is trying to do, which is to instill a good conversation around risk management. You talked about governance. Part of risk management is actual governance. What are the risks? Certainly cyber plays a big role in that. Certainly employee behavior plays a big role in that, malicious insiders. There's just all kinds of things that a CISO needs to think about in terms of communicating what those risks are at a board level. And so I think some of the challenges are going to be, what should I as a CISO present to the board? How much should I tell the board? If we think about liability from a board perspective, once they know every little detail, then they're on the hook for solving and making sure the management actually solves every little detail. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but how much of a shift in that board conversation needs to go from, how do we fund what needs to happen to address the risks, versus, hey, we just blocked 2 million ransomware attacks last month, so let's talk about that all board meeting. Well, there's not a lot of value to that versus the risk conversation, in my opinion.
Right. And then, you get into the technical versus non-technical backgrounds. Some of this content, as you mentioned, is quite technical, and board members come from a variety of diverse backgrounds. That's going to be a challenge, right? This sort of new landscape, and navigating that in terms of its complexities and being able to communicate, the technical in a least technical jargon. What do you think the challenges there are for the CISO in terms of helping the board, understand this new world?
Well, in fact, the role of the CISO has shifted over the last few years anyway. It has become less of a SOC manager and more of a strategic player in the organization. So hopefully the CISOs that are watching this have already made that shift and can have that board level conversation. They should be doing that with their executive teams anyway, and bubbling up the important things, the so what's, as my CEO likes to say. Thanks, Chris, for that briefing. So what?
Exactly.
So what do we do about it?
Yeah.
Well, here's my agenda, and here's what I think we should do about it, and here's the money that it might cost us in this next fiscal year to do some of these things. And then, of course, if you have a big issue from a cyber event perspective, you shouldn't be sweeping that under the rug either. You should be sharing that with certain members of the board who can understand how they can help. Now, opponents of this whole SEC effort to get more information from boards, they're saying, well, once you tell the board member, we don't want the board to have to manage these kinds of things. And I agree with opponents from that perspective. It should come back to the CISO should come back to the executive team to address the risks, again, from that risk perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I think it'll underscore the need for these organizations to have better tools around visualization of that risk, around reporting of those risks, around being able to provide auditable reporting on compliance, for example, to show that sort of history there. So I think that's going to be an interesting driver demand coming out of this ruling, like especially when you think about the complex cloud environments that infrastructure is now sort of seeping into, right? How do you as an organization get a hold of your risk and compliance and privacy stature and posture rather at the cloud level? That's going to be a challenge. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm thinking of two different things. One is I'm recalling some of the Facebook hearings at the Senate, and I'm just chuckling. I'm laughing because there was so much, so little understanding of what actually Facebook was, just at that level. So if you think about, what is the cloud? Well, let's start talking about cloud. Well, again, you have to bubble up the discussion. You don't want to necessarily talk about microservices and low code, no code, shift left kind of things when someone doesn't understand necessarily what a virtual machine is. So you have to bubble that up. The other thing I'm thinking about is, what is the SEC going to do with all this information? Is it just going to go into a big black hole of thanks for the info, or are they going to make that kind of an intelligence engine to give us more insights as to what's happening by sector, by subsector, who's under attack, how does it relate to critical infrastructure, and where are the actors? Now, I've been advocating for a long time. Our marketing team knows this, and they kind of shrink back every time I get on this topic. But we need to be more proactive about going after the bad guys. Just this week, I think we just saw a reward being offered for information leading to the arrest and the location of certain ransomware gang members. This was by our own government. Finally, we're starting to go after them like Europol is doing, and some of the other organizations throughout the world. But we need to continue to do that. And the SEC needs to think about a strategy on what they're going to do with this information, because it could be very helpful.
Absolutely. I agree with you totally there.
Thank you. We should talk more about what we disagree about. So, Sanjay, you're a strategy officer. You've led lots of organizations in Asia, Canada. You've seen some of the issues related to some of the cyber issues. What are your thoughts in terms of how we could make this better for the SEC rather than just this grab bag of send me some info?
So a couple of thoughts. I think number one is get to sort of some standardized way to measure and report. That was sort of one of the learnings, I think, from Sarbanes-Oxley, right? It's standard common language that is understood across different organizations and provides some comparability. Number two, I think, is provide board level some basic education in the cybersecurity domain in space. I think that will go a long way to bridging the divide between the technical and the non-technical. And then third, I think, is driving a governance process and having the right kind of risk conversations at the right level, to your point earlier, not sort of mired down into technical techno speak or things that are sort of not impactful in terms of to the business and the business strategy. I think those sort of three things are important for the SEC to consider as they're rolling out this ruling.
Excellent perspectives, Sanjay. Thanks for joining in this discussion. This is Chris and Sanjay signing off. Thanks so much.